IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, I'm Sarthak and I welcome you to one more episode of All Things Policy. Today we are going to discuss about land laws and an initiative with respect to land laws. I have with me Dr. Namita Wahi. Dr. Namita is a senior fellow at the Center for Policy Research and she is the founding director of the Land Rights Initiative. Her team has put together a portal with different land laws from multiple states in India in a very structured and a visually appealing manner. It is in a manner that can be analyzed, the laws can be used in various ways, and it's a publicly accessible database. The link for the portal is along with this podcast. Do check it out. So, in this episode, we are going to talk about this specific initiative and also we're going to talk about land laws in India. Hi, Dr. Namita. Welcome to All Things Policy.
Hi, Sarthak. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation, and thanks to the Takshashila Institution.
Yeah. So, now, Namita, you have your team and you have been working on this for like 5 years and you have put together this portal. Now, I was wondering, what is the motivation behind this, right? Why did you think of doing something like this and at such a scale?
So, Sarthak, when I first started Land Rights Initiative in 2014, I started it with the idea that land is not only central to India's economic development trajectory, but it is central to the very idea of India itself. 75 years after independence, 60% of all Indians are dependent upon land for their livelihoods. And land is seen as not just an economic resource by them, but it is seen as central to their individual and community identity, history, and culture. If you go back to independence times, the freedom struggle was premised not just on the idea of liberating us from a past of colonial domination and subordination, but it was really premised on the idea of bringing about a new economic and social order, which would guarantee poverty alleviation to millions of Indians, as well as bring about social redistribution. And land was central to both the economic uplift as well as the social justice or social reform aspect of that imagination of India. And as we all know, land reform laws were at the center of the policy agenda in the 50s and 60s. But 7 years ago, when I started the Land Rights Initiative, land had sort of disappeared from the policy agenda. It was being referred to variously as a bottleneck in the process of economic development, but there was no serious engagement with land policy at that point in time. And the goal behind the Land Rights Initiative and the Mapping Indian Land Laws project has really to bring land back to the center stage of the policy agenda. And the reason why this is important is, as I mentioned, 60% of Indians are dependent upon land for their livelihood. And we have seen this even more in the COVID pandemic, when migrant labor there's been reverse migration from urban to rural areas, because when people lost their jobs, it was to their villages and to their homes and to their lands that they returned to. So that was the motivation behind setting up the Land Rights Initiative. And in our early work in the Land Rights Initiative, it became clear that land was one of the biggest sources of conflict in India. So, land conflict was affecting the lives of millions of people, millions of hectares of land, and investments worth billions of dollars was being threatened by land conflict. And so, as I began to examine the reason behind land conflict, I realized that there were basically 3 types of land conflict that were being manifest in the form of legal disputes in courts. So the maximum number of legal disputes in courts at every level of court in India pertain to land. But also we were seeing a lot of on-ground conflict, extra-legal conflict, as I may call it, over land.
So basically, these are conflicts between individuals?
Yes. So there were 3 types of conflict. The first and the largest quantum of conflict was a state versus people conflict. The second conflict was a people versus people conflict. And the third was a state versus state conflict. So let me explain that. So our first research report in 2017 was a study of all land acquisition disputes in India, all disputes that had been decided by the Supreme Court since its creation in 1950 to 2017 when the report came out. And over the 66-year period, as we studied these disputes, we realized that the maximum number of land disputes in courts involved land acquisition cases between the state and the people. The second type of conflict, which is a people versus people conflict, is between individuals. It could be about a property dispute, ownership of property, tenancy over property, whether it's urban or rural property. Or sometimes it manifests in the form of ethnic conflict or caste conflict over land or property. And then the third type of conflict is state versus state conflict. And, under the colonial regime, land was basically organized into revenue land, which came under the revenue department, and forest land, which came under the forest department. And what we've seen is that there's been a lot of dispute between the two departments in all the states over whether the land belongs to the revenue department or the forest department. And that itself spills over into people versus state conflict, because people may have pattas from the revenue department, but the forest department claims that this is forest land and it wants to evict them from the land. So, given this conflict, the focus of our work at the Land Rights Initiative, the focus of my research has been how do we understand this conflict first and how do we then try to eliminate it? And because land is central to India and Indians, and laws are central to the resolution of this conflict, because the laws are the ones that either empower people to hold on to their land, or allow the state to dispossess people from their land, or empower different individuals and communities to have rights vis-a-vis each other. So the next question was, okay, what are the laws relating to land?
Yeah. So, Namita, before we go into that, right? So, I have a specific question related to this. So, when I was going through your portal, right, I saw that there are different ways by which you have organized the website, right? You have basically organized all the laws, some 484 laws, in three different ways. Either we can look at it in a geographic manner. So, some 8 states are there, and you have laws for each of these states. Another way is through timeline. And the third was you have categorized these laws, and there were some 31 categories, and then there were some subcategories. Now, when I was looking at these categories, right, some of these were related to land reforms, some of them were related to land use, some of them were related to land alienation. So I can understand that these are all linked with land. I mean, land reforms, land alienation, land use, something which we can easily relate to. But then there were also some laws which were related to cultural property. There were some laws which were related to, let's say, police power or water. Now, how do you connect all these things together? I mean, what is the definition of land law that you have considered here for the purpose of this entire exercise? How have you defined land laws?
That's a great question, Sarthak. And I think that is the real value of the land laws website and the land laws project, is that we've not just looked at the laws that very clearly can be identified as relating to land, but rather we've looked at all laws that might have a bearing on somebody's land rights. So to take some of the examples that you have given, the laws relating to police powers are laws where, the state may have the power to enter your land forcibly because they want to inspect, they want to survey, they want to do multiple things. Now, this is an encroachment on your land rights, and yet it would not be captured in a land reform category of laws. Secondly, the kinds of laws that are covered in police powers also include there are many laws which actually apply to riot stricken areas or disturbed areas where people's ability to use their land is very limited because of the police powers of the state. So, those kinds of land, insofar as they infringe on people's land rights, will be covered in the database. You also referred to cultural property. So, near archaeological sites, this cultural property includes both religious property as well as archaeological property. And there are separate laws that actually govern the rights of people. So, if something is designated as an archaeological site, then certain kinds of activities that people may be doing with respect to people who are living close to the sites are no longer going to be permitted, or they are going to be restricted. So, it is the rights of these people and towards their land which are also going to be captured in the laws that we've covered.
Okay. Okay. And one thing that I observed here is, again, there are 31 categories. There are so many subcategories. Now, I was wondering how this composition, if you look at laws over a period of time, right? If I just use that timeline thing, and I found out that the maximum number of laws that you have, it is in the initial decades, right? From 1940s, 50s, you have the most number of laws. But then in the later stage, right, 80s, 90s, 2000s, the number of laws that are being drafted, which are coming into the picture, right? So that has gone down, but it has remained more or less constant for the last 4 decades. Now, yeah, obviously in the 50s and the 60s, the number of laws that would have been drafted would be more, because we were creating a state, and then individual states were also formed, since land is primarily the jurisdiction of the state. So they would have drafted laws, but still the number of laws that we are drafting in the last 4 decades, I mean, it has remained more or less constant. It has not gone down drastically. And I was wondering how the categories for these things would have changed. I mean, in the 1980s, what kind of laws were mostly passed? In the 90s, what kind of laws would have been passed? Is there anything that you have studied like that?
Yes. So, Sarthak, one thing I want to mention here is that we studied over 1,300 laws to create this website. Right now, the website has all original active laws. So, what we've done is we've actually not just collected laws. First of all, we've collected officially authenticated copies of all the laws. And we have checked whether these laws are active or whether they have been repealed. So, right now, the website only has all the laws that are currently active. Now, within these laws, as I was mentioning, that land was at the forefront of the policy agenda in the 50s and 60s. Now, out of the 31 categories that you mentioned, so the laws have been categorized into 31 categories and 151 subcategories, of which there are 4 categories which have over 100 laws. These include land reforms, land acquisition and requisition, and land revenue and taxation, as well as laws pertaining to what I call decentralized governance. Now, the laws that were enacted in the 50s and 60s largely deal with land reforms as well as land revenue and taxation. Land acquisition laws are actually continuing from the colonial period, but the states have also enacted their laws pretty much between the 50s and the 80s. It is, generally, if you see legislation on all subjects was greatest in these decades. So, PRS legislative research has a lot of data on how much laws Parliament is passing, and makes sense because what has then happened is a lot of amendments have been passed to existing laws, because once the structure has been created, then you have the amendments that are being passed to them. Whereas some of the laws relating to urbanization, what I call decentralized governance is a term which covers a lot of panchayat and municipality laws, which give a lot of powers to panchayats and municipalities to deal with land rights in areas within their jurisdiction. So we see a lot of municipality laws and a lot of urbanization, a lot of infrastructure development authorities, which have the powers to make highways and so on. A lot of those laws have been sort of enacted in the later years, in the later decades. Yeah.
With the, I think in the 90s, after the Constitution, 73rd, 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, all these things would have gone hand in hand, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. So, it's interesting. We have some municipalities that are there from the colonial period, but yes, pretty much the laws that come under decentralized governance would be after the 73rd Constitutional Amendment. So, post 90s.
Yeah, exactly. And so one thing that you were mentioning, that there are a lot of conflicts, right? You mentioned about the different kind of conflicts that are there. Now, since there are so many laws right now, right? You have covered 8 states, and then you are mentioning that 1,300 laws you studied, and out of that you have put together some 484 laws which are now in action, right? So I was wondering, what are the harms? Because what are some of the benefits if you have multiple laws, and what are some of the harms if you have too many laws?
Yes. So, just to add to what you said, we studied the laws from 8 states and all central laws.
Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of, see, each law has been enacted for a particular time period for a particular issue. Some laws are like the land revenue code. Like these revenue codes have been enacted at a time that agricultural economy was the largest source of revenue for the government. That, as we know, has steadily declined. So, today agriculture is contributing only 25% to the GDP. Now, in terms of the benefits and harms, see, on the website, about 150 laws are from the colonial period. These were grandfathered post the adoption of the Constitution by the Constitution itself. And so they are still in force, right? Now, these colonial laws, the colonial government's main motivation was to maximize land revenue because land was the biggest source of revenue for the government. They did not care about the people of India.
Hmm.
So these laws were made with that mindset, whether it was the Land Acquisition Act of 1894, which was in force for like 120 years till it was repealed and replaced by the new Land Acquisition Act, or if it was the forest laws, which basically, by one stroke of a pen, declared that all forests belong to the British government. And what has happened is that, belong to the British government, and it evicted all the forest dwellers, as a matter of law. In actual practice, that eviction happened, and there was pushback, and there was some of the greatest heroes, the Adivasi heroes that we have, like Birsa Munda and all. There was, these are heroes because of the battles with the British and so on. But that was the motivation. So the fact that we still have many of those laws on the statute books, we have to, look at them to see whether they fit into the democratic imagination that India has. That being said, it is not a black and white thing that just because a law is a colonial law, it's a bad law. It's something that has to be looked at in the case of each particular law, because there could be important provisions that are necessary to safeguard rights of the people. As regards the laws that have been enacted post independence, we have to, again, these laws have been enacted for various concerns. Like within land reforms, there are laws that abolish zamindari. There are laws that put ceilings on land holdings and provided for redistribution. There are laws that protect rights of tenants. Now, just because these are old laws doesn't mean that they're not important laws even today, because we do need to secure tenants' rights and so on. And then there are laws that have been, enacted for particular issues. For example, inheritance, succession, and partition laws, where there has been a lot of amendments that have happened. So I think that amendments to safeguard rights of women, which were not sufficiently safeguarded. So there, a lot of laws need to be reconciled. Because on the one hand, we see that there have been changes made to the Hindu Succession Act, but they may not have been aligned with, changes to the agricultural laws, which also provide their own succession to agricultural land. So we need to look at reconciling laws as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is where this entire portal, the entire study will come into the picture, right? I mean, from here you can figure out, it will at least help you figure out where are these overlaps.
Yes. And, the thing is that each law deserves a serious research and investigation. So what I hope is, I call this project the 1000 Land Laws Project, because we analyzed over 1000 laws. I hope that it will launch 1,000 research projects, because there is that information out there. This is primary data which didn't exist earlier. So now people can actually study and see, okay, but you would first need to know what you are studying before you can actually study it.
Yeah, true. So what we'll do is we'll look at some of the potential benefits of this study. We'll look at who are going to be the key beneficiaries of this particular portal. But before that, we'll have a short break.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Advertising is Dead, Varun speaks to Rohit Raj, business partner at BBK Vines. Rohit talks about what it takes to be a creator's backbone and shares some exclusive tidbits from the marketing of Dindora. On Smarter with Sid, Siddharth tells us what to do next once we have our dream job. On 30 Minute Raste, Keshav points out the contrast in commuting by Indian and American railways. On Hans Vani, here's the story Ulchan that asks a question about love and friendship. And on Marathi Kirkitun, the Deshmukhs dissect Padmatai Gole's famous poem Jafyacha Zada. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. We really do appreciate the word of mouth. Also, don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms that you're listening to us on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is. And we are also on YouTube. On YouTube, you can check out our various channels on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Bank of Baroda and CoinSwitch Kuber. Thank you for making this possible.
So coming back to Namita, what do you think are going to be the benefits of this study? And who are going to be the main beneficiaries here?
Sarthak, as I imagine the project, it is a project to create an informed citizenry. My goal is to actually reach everyone, which is why we conceptualize this in the form of an interactive online architecture. So anyone, and like I said, 60% of Indians depend upon land for their livelihood, but all of us have interaction with land, right? We own, we rent property, because this includes, rural as well as urban. So the goal was to put this information out there in an easily accessible fashion, so that anyone who wants to know something about, say, if I'm living in a state that is covered in the database, and the 8 states that are covered include Punjab in the north, Gujarat in the west, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana in the south, Bihar and Jharkhand in the east, and Assam and Meghalaya in the northeast. So if I want to know what laws are applicable to me, I can just click on my state and I get the laws. And not only do I get the laws, I can also get summaries of the laws. So, the language of law is opaque because there is the barrier of the legal language. So that's why we have summarized it in easily accessible English so that people can actually access these laws. And, we hope to take this project further in terms of translating it into Hindi and other languages, and that is a future plan for the project. So the biggest beneficiary is, I think, all citizens of India, and it's a project essentially to deepen democracy. Because as I was mentioning in the beginning, why do we need to know the laws? Because a law to be a law needs to be known, right? Because if I don't know, the purpose of a law is to subject human conduct to the governance of rules. But if I don't know what rules apply to me, then, it's not really a law. And yet, most of us don't even know what laws are applicable to us, let alone how many there are and, what they actually are saying. So, this is a project to basically create an informed citizenry. Beyond that, there are specific stakeholders who will benefit from using the law. The first, of course, is the government of India, which also doesn't know how many laws on land there are. In the process of putting together this project, no government department has an understanding of all the laws that are applicable in a particular state or at the union level. So this is going to be beneficial to the government itself. I mean, essentially, our imagination has been to create a Google Maps of land laws. And that's where I'm hoping that the government will benefit. Civil society organizations are going to benefit immensely from this because they definitely use the law to put forward their claims and their rights. And because the laws have been summarized, they will be able to train people in understanding the laws that govern their lives. Apart from that, academics, like I said, the 1000 land laws project, I hope will launch 1000 research projects because now the information is out there. So lawyers, historians, so mostly laws are accessed by lawyers and even lawyers access them through paid archives. And yet most of these laws are usually available to the affluent lawyers in, the urban centers of the country. But there are lots of small town lawyers who are, representing clients in disputes. And now this is a free website, which, they can access and they can know what the laws are and they can download officially authenticated copies and they can put forward their clients' claims. So lawyers, legal academics, historians, because we have, laws from the colonial period. We also, someone can trace actually the historical evolution of the law in a particular subject area because now instead of having to go and search for those laws, they have all the 100 land reforms laws from these states in one place. Apart from that, corporates. So one of the things that I often say is that, a lot of times corporates enter into MOUs with the government where the government promises to provide them land and then the project runs into trouble because the government hasn't actually negotiated with the people whose lands there are before promising and signing an MOU with the corporates. And mostly the corporates, they don't have an understanding of Indian land laws, but now they have this website that they can just go to and their lawyers can help them understand whether this is something that these are the questions that they should be asking the government as to whether, this project can actually go forward. So I think it'll be a wonderful resource for corporates as well. And finally, it will be a very valuable resource in the creation of data sets and the intersection of law and technology. This is a burgeoning field. We have seen technology being applied to language for many decades now. But the language of the law is sort of two steps removed because there is language itself and then there is legal language. And what we have been able to create and what is available as a resource for people who work in this at this important intersection is that hopefully the technology of translating legal language will benefit from such a vast volume of data.
Yeah. So, Namita, a couple of things I want to reiterate. So, in the beginning, you mentioned that how a large number of cases that are pending right now are related to land conflicts, right? And so, if this particular project is something which is used by citizens, right? And this can be one of the ways by which maybe some of these land conflicts will get reduced, or at least you'll have a better way to solve these problems. So in a state where the state capacity is something which is questionable, so if the number of land conflicts get reduced, the police administration and the revenue administration, who again have limited resources, they can focus on some other cases apart from, I mean, they don't need to focus on the land disputes because already some of these things are resolved with the help of this project. So do you think this is something which is also feasible?
Absolutely. I think that, courts will greatly benefit from this website as well. And especially the courts, not, the Supreme Court and the High Courts, which are better resourced, but the lower courts, where most of these disputes are pending. And just so you know, from a land acquisition study, the average pendency of a land acquisition dispute, which is one of the largest subsets of land disputes, is from the lowest court to the Supreme Court is 20 years. So this is the people versus state conflict that I mentioned, but there is a lot of people versus people conflict where the disputes may be pending for even longer. So I think it can be a wonderful resource for the judicial and the revenue administration to actually, have this source of laws, and it'll definitely help save them time. And, Sarthak, knowledge is power. So it will empower the litigants. And I have evidence of that from a land acquisition report. It was a report. I didn't think that people would read a 40-page research report. But once it was out there, I was getting calls, and I still do get calls from farmers all over the country. Some of them don't even speak English, but they know about the report. They're using it in their cases. And actually, that report came out in 2017. And, that's when I started the Mapping Indian Land Laws project. And I was like, I didn't know that this work would reach every individual. So how can I actually make it easier for them to access it even more? And that's when I conceptualized, I'm not just putting out a research report, which we are also going to do, but also just putting it in the form of an interactive online architecture
Yeah.
so that they can use it by themselves.
Yeah, and so this accountability bit is also very important, right? Sometimes the state can hide behind multiple laws, right? So this is something which can help us understand the reason for the different kind of conflicts. It can help in demystifying some of the laws, and it can bring in more transparency, and which in turn which can help us hold the government accountable.
Absolutely. And I think I just want to add there that, apart from state capacity, it's also state unwillingness. So it's not even in the course of creating this massive database, we found that, the states do have the laws. They could put a lot of information online, but they are not choosing to prioritize that because, again, information is power. So although with the digital revolution, more effort has been made to put laws online, most of the central laws are now online, not at the start of our project, but now they are. But at the state level, it's very variable across states. And I think that they have obligations under the Right to Information Act to actually proactively make information available. And, Sarthak, this is the first layer. Like I said, the Supreme Court cases that we studied was the first layer. But once our report came out, others have now looked at High Court and, done a similar study. Similarly, here, this is the first layer because below the laws, there is delegated legislation. There are rules, there are notifications. There is a lot that can be added to the website. And that's where a lot of the action also lies. And there is nothing stopping the government from putting something like this together. And once we have
Yeah,
put this out there, it is definitely up to the government to take this work forward as well, because this is what the government is here to do as representatives of citizens, is to actually take this work forward and make laws accessible to people.
yeah. So this is what I was also wondering, right? So something that you have done, ideally the government should have taken it up. Yeah, but one question I have here is, as you mentioned, right? Initially you were thinking of having a report, but then you decided that you should go ahead with an interactive portal, the one that you have developed. And also you have this 1000 land laws project. Now, apart from this, anything else you have in mind? What other things that you are willing to take up?
So we are going to put out a research report as well with more analysis than that is beyond what is there on the website. So that research report will be something that people can refer to alongside the website to understand the overall project in its imagination. So that's definitely going to come out. Apart from this, we're also working on a project on the use of data analytics on legal texts. As I mentioned, we have a large volume of legal data which we have created for our previous research reports on land acquisition disputes, where we studied over 1,000 land acquisition disputes. So again, it was a pioneering study and one of the largest sets of legal disputes that has been studied. So we are trying to see whether we can use technology to replicate the findings that had been done manually by researchers. And finally, of course, is my book project, which I've been working on for many, many years, which is on the right to property and economic development and its intersection with democracy in India.
Okay, interesting. So all the best for these projects. And also, I mean, when it comes to this particular website, are you also planning to have it in multiple languages, cover multiple states?
Yes. So, since the website was launched, which was almost exactly a month ago, we have received a lot of feedback from people who are using the website. So, there are two things that we are planning to do. One is to make the website more mobile accessible, because we found that 75% of our users are accessing the website on the mobile. And that's how we want to make it more and more accessible to people. And the second thing is to try and see if we can use natural language processing techniques to translate the laws into different languages.
Yeah, interesting.
We have to ensure accuracy. So that is going to be a big project in itself, but that is part of the future imagination for this project.
Thanks. I mean, that is something which is going to be important because a huge chunk of our population might not be able to access laws in English language. Large chunk of population will be either will be either able to read writing Hindi or some other Indian languages.
I would just end by saying that I hope that the Mapping Indian Land Laws project, which is imagined to be a Google Maps for land laws, I hope we can take it in multiple directions forward. And it's not just when I say we, I don't mean just the Land Rights Initiative. I have, for the first time, created a blueprint in a way of what can be done in this space. And I think it can expand to, if other people want to take the work forward, expand to study of land laws in other states. It could, go down vertically to looking at delegated legislation. It could go beyond land to seeing other kinds of laws that can also be brought on to the website. The map is there, the interactive map is there. It could be, the intersection of land laws with, say, criminal laws in these states, or land laws with some other laws that are relevant. So the project has a lot of scope to develop in multiple directions, but the project has been imagined for the people of India. So we are also going to imagine the future iterations based on what the people want, what would be most useful for them. And therefore, feedback from you and from your listeners to this podcast would be very, very valuable for us in taking this work forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Namita, for this interesting insights. Thanks to the listeners for tuning in. We'll meet again in one more episode of All Things Policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarthak.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Don't you think that if everyone around you is getting smart, you better be smarter? Hey there, I'm the traveling professor Siddharth Deshmukh, and I'm back with season 2 of my podcast to make you smarter. Smarter with Sid. What's this season's focus about? Well, it's about 10-minute nuggets that will make you stand out at work. It's time to go from smart to smarter. Tune in every Tuesday and Thursday and become smarter with Sid.
A wise man once said, traveling, it makes you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller.
Well, listen to such travel stories and experiences exploring India on the Musafir Stories with us, Saif and Faiza.
Catch us on the IVM website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.